Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. What's your I didn't believe in ghost until paranormal story? Story 1. House in the Woods.
I used to rent a townhouse deep in the woods with my ex. One night, while I was out on duty, I got a frantic call at around 3 in the morning. She was absolutely hysterical, and I immediately thought, oh my God, someone must have broken in. I rushed home as fast as I could, but when I got there, the cause of her panic was something far worse. The wooden baby gate we used to keep our puppy downstairs had somehow flown all the way from the base of the stairs, up the stairs, hit the ceiling, leaving a mark, and then landed in a twisted, mangled heap at the top. The puppy was locked safely in her cage the entire time, so she couldn't have done it. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. I couldn't explain it. This was just the beginning. A few weeks later, while we were in the kitchen, we witnessed something even stranger. A large, heavy feeder we kept for the cat, one I'd just cleaned and placed on the countertop, suddenly rotated by itself. It turned 90 degrees upright, then slowly tipped over another 90 degrees, landing upside down with barely a sound. This feeder was heavy. There was no way it could have moved like that on its own. When I tried to recreate the motion, it crashed loudly. How could something so heavy move so quietly? Then came the little things that would make your skin crawl. The silverware drawer would slam shut with a deafening bang whenever I walked into the kitchen. The animals, especially the dog and cat, would stare into one corner of the room, their eyes wide with fear, and back away slowly, as if they were being watched by something I couldn't see. The dead-bolted door would be wide open as soon as I turned my back. And then there were the nightmares. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, feeling like something was in the room with me, watching, waiting. I don't know what happened in that house. I'm not sure I believe in ghosts, but after everything that happened, I can't help but wonder. The experiences were too real, too terrifying to dismiss.
Story 2. Midnight Visitor.
During my time in college, I lived in an apartment complex, one that seemed ordinary at first glance. But strange things began happening that I couldn't explain. Late at night, around 2 in the morning, I would hear the unmistakable sound of glass breaking. It was so clear and distinct, as if a window had shattered. But every time I searched the apartment, I found no broken glass anywhere. My younger brother, who would often come over to party with us, even burst into my room a couple of times, convinced that someone had broken in. But the apartment was always locked, and there were never any signs of forced entry. It was just the eerie sound of glass breaking in the dead of night. The most unsettling event occurred one night when my girlfriend stayed over. She had a habit of kicking and pushing in her sleep, and I woke up after she nudged me. But when I looked over, I was shocked. She wasn't asleep. She was sitting at the foot of the bed, facing away from me. Confused and a little alarmed, I called her name. She stood up slowly, walked out of the room, and at that exact moment, I heard it again, the distinct sound of glass breaking. My heart dropped. I quickly scanned the room, only to realize my girlfriend was still lying next to me, fast asleep. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It didn't add up. That was the only time I ever saw something out of the ordinary in that apartment. But the sounds of breaking glass kept happening. They came at random times, like a chilling reminder that something wasn't quite right in that place. I never found an explanation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone.
Story 3. The Phantom Door Slam.
When I was in college, I lived in these really old dormitories. The place hadn't been renovated in over 70 years, and the thermostat looked like the first version ever made. We each had our own keycard to access the building, which is important for later. The doors automatically lock behind you the moment they shut. The bedrooms were designed with cabinets that lined the walls, close to the ceiling, and there was also a mirror and a dresser in each room. Winter break arrived and I decided to stay behind while both of my roommates went home. It was just me and my dog for the next week or so. Both of my roommates went home to other states, so I knew there was no way they would be back before the time they had told me. A couple of days into me being alone, I was taking a shower with the bathroom door open when I heard what sounded like a door slamming in our dorm room. I peeked my head out from the shower curtain and called out, "Hello," and called my roommates' names. No one answered, so I kind of shrugged it off. A couple of nights later, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard the loud slam again, this time from one of my roommates' rooms. I froze in fear, and my dog started going absolutely crazy. She hid under the bed, which was very unusual because she had never done that before, and she weighed over 60 pounds. I called out again and even texted my roommate to ask if she had come back early. She replied that she hadn't. Her bedroom door was locked, so I couldn't go in there to check. I assumed it must have been maintenance doing something in the building, although in hindsight, it was strange that this would be happening at 9 p.m. I kind of forgot about the situation until a week later. My roommate came into my room, looking pale and frightened. She asked if I had been in her room, and I said there was no way I had. She told me to come look. My roommate had fairy lights strung up in her room that she never turned off, but they had been cut in the middle and were hanging down. Additionally, the two cabinet doors had fallen off, which I assumed was the source of the slamming sound I had heard. They were on the floor, but the oddest part was that they were stacked one on top of the other, not underneath the cabinet, but to the right of it. It was honestly one of the most bizarre things I had ever seen. We asked the housing office if anyone had entered our apartment during that time frame, and they said no. Ever since that incident, I experienced other strange events in that dorm from time to time. My dog would get spooked every now and then, especially after the winter break incident. When it was finally time to leave, I was more than ready to get out of there.
Story 4. Shook hands with.
I believe to this day that the vast majority of paranormal videos and photos have a plausible explanation outside of the paranormal. These can often be explained away by factors like computer-generated imagery, poor quality cameras, pareidolia, or even outright fakes. That being said, I do believe that real paranormal events can still happen. This particular story happened about 8 years ago during a time when I didn't believe in ghosts as much as I do now. My family and I were staying at the Fort Garry Hotel in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The hotel is beautiful and I had some free time, so I decided to explore it. As usual, I got lost in the building because I tend to get directionally challenged the moment I step into an unfamiliar place. While exploring, I ran into someone who looked like they worked at the hotel, but they didn't seem to be housekeeping or a clerk, so I wasn't sure what their job was. I asked for directions back to the lobby since I needed to meet my family in a few minutes. As soon as I arrived in the lobby and passed the front desk, I noticed that the clerk and a security guard were staring at me, looking shocked and pale. The security guard asked who I had been talking to earlier for directions. I told him I thought it was someone who worked at the hotel. That's when he told me that the floor I had been on, though I can't remember which one, was known for paranormal activity. The security guard then, surprisingly, showed me the footage from the cameras. The person I had spoken to was not visible on the footage, even though they should have been in plain view. It was incredibly creepy because I had shaken that person's hand. The footage showed me shaking hands with thin air. The person had appeared in front of me like any normal person, and when I touched their hand, it felt just like any other human hand, soft and warm. But they never appeared on the security footage. There was no way I could have blocked them from the camera's view, as I am only 5'6". The security guard even pulled up a second angle to confirm, but there was no one there. Despite the footage, no one else believes me. To this day, I still cannot explain what happened.
Story 5. What happened in my room?
A couple of years ago, when I was 23, I was still living with my parents. I was upstairs in my bedroom, hanging out and watching television. I was on the phone with my friend at the time, and while talking to them, I left my room and went downstairs to have a cigarette. The only other person in the house that day was my dad, who I later found out was asleep in his room on the main level. I was gone for about 7 minutes. When I walked back upstairs and entered my bedroom, I was still on the phone. I walked towards my bed and sat down. After about 20 seconds or so, I glanced back up to turn on the television, and that's when I saw it. At the end of my bed, there was a piece of paper sticking up from the baseboard. I didn't understand what I was seeing, and in that moment, I was completely silent, trying to process what was in front of me. It was the strangest feeling, like my brain couldn't fully grasp what was happening. I said, "Nate," and he kept asking, "What? What?" But I could hardly speak. I quickly told him I would call him back, and then I took out my phone and snapped a picture. I took the picture before doing anything else, before even looking at the paper closely. I just had to capture it because I couldn't believe my eyes. I had no idea how it got there, why it was placed that way, or what it was doing there in the first place. The paper turned out to be an old economics paper of mine. It was about the government and the divide our two-party system creates in America. I had written this paper 3 years earlier for a college introductory economics course. It was originally 2 pages, but one of the pages was missing. The edges of the paper were burned, and in the middle of the page, there was a large yellow triangle that looked almost like it had been highlighted. The triangle even appeared to be luminescent, like the design on a dollar bill. That moment scared me to the core. The paper had been in my closet, stacked away with other schoolwork, and now it was ripped from the other page and placed upright at the edge of my bed for me to find. I was only gone for 7 minutes. There was no way anyone could have done that. It felt absolutely impossible. After that bizarre experience, I left my parents' house and went to a hotel with a friend. There's a second part to this story, which is just as frightening, but I don't even want to get into that right now. Anyway, I still wish I understood what it all meant. I can't tell if it was good or bad. I have no idea what the symbolism of the paper was, why it had strange burns around the edges, or what the large luminescent triangle meant. To this day, I still don't know how or why it happened, but my understanding of the world has been completely changed since that day. I was only gone for 7 minutes.
Story 6. Dark Presence in My Room.
Growing up, my family moved around quite a bit due to divorces and other reasons, such as renting and finding permanent homes. In my childhood home, my brother and I would regularly play in the basement, but there was one room that made both of us feel unexplainably uneasy. We didn't like to walk by it at the end of the hallway, wouldn't use the bathroom near it, and would never leave each other alone in the basement. It was a negative, heavy feeling that neither of us could describe at such a young age. This room was our guest bedroom, but we never had guests stay the night, so it was always unoccupied. There was an old wooden frame bed and chest in that room, which came from my dad's family. Despite my mom's protests to change the room into something more useful, my dad insisted on keeping the furniture. Years later, when I talked to my dad about our dislike for this room and the negative presence I felt around it, he shared his own stories about the house. He used to use the bathroom across the hall from that room and would leave the door cracked, since no one was down there. However, he would always see something going past the door, like someone walking up and down the hallway. My brother, as a baby, would look over his shoulder while being held and stare at something, sometimes even giggling at an empty space in the room. Eventually, my dad yelled at it to leave, and after that, my brother stopped staring at empty spaces and laughing, while my dad only felt the presence in the room and the hallway. It became clear to me that the entity seemed to have a connection to my dad. Later, in my early teens, my parents divorced, and my dad moved out, taking the furniture with him. We didn't get along well during that time, arguing and having a rift between us. The presence, however, remained connected to that bedroom set. Even after the furniture was moved, the negative, heavy feeling still lingered in the guest bedroom where the furniture had been. As our arguments became more frequent, I felt the presence more often. I would catch glimpses of someone or something in mirrors, glass reflections, and even in my dreams. I always felt watched, like someone was looking over me. Soon, I began experiencing sleep paralysis, and an entity appearing adult one with long dark hair would start in the corner of my room. Eventually, it would feel like the entity was weighing down on my chest and suffocating me. I woke up gasping for air multiple times, and eventually I noticed a bruise on my chest. I saw it in the reflection of the television the next day and still felt like I couldn't breathe. I mentioned this strange experience to my massage therapist, who is very spiritual. When she touched my chest, she shuddered and described the entity exactly as I had seen it in the reflections and during the sleep paralysis episodes. It's been years now, and my dad and I have repaired our relationship. The presence, however, remains in the guest bedroom and will always stay there until my dad addresses the attachment with this ghost. He knows that the ghost is attached to him, but he has learned to live peacefully with it. A witch friend of mine gave me a protective charm and taught me ways to seal off the guest bedroom. Since then, the entity has left me alone. She asked me to perform a ritual to communicate with the entity, using a pen and paper to ask it what it wanted, but I'm still too scared to learn the answer.
Story 7. Death's Presence in La Marsa.
A few years ago, back when I had a social life and the economy wasn't as bad, I was looking to rent a small house or apartment to finally live on my own. One of the places I went to scout out was the lower floor of a house on the outskirts of the wealthiest area in town, La Marsa. The person showing me around was a gentle, polite man in his early 50s, accompanied by his teenage daughter. The house was clean, with light flooding through the windows. While it was empty of furniture, as was advertised, it's common here, it was clearly well maintained. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was unwanted there. I was on edge the entire visit. I felt almost tracked, for lack of a better word. And there was a pungent smell that I could best describe as the smell of death. The kind of outdoorsy, dusty, moldy smell you'd encounter at a crypt or a badly maintained cemetery. I powered through the entire visit, told the owner I'd contact him soon with my final answer, and left. A few days later, I was sitting with a group of friends at a cafe, trying to help one of us, let's call him Jay, find a home to rent after his current landlord asked him to leave in 4 months. As the subject of La Marsa came up, Jay said, I've seen some places there, but all of them were way over budget. I'm still annoyed though, because there was that place. What place? A first floor of a house at the very end of the district, right as I entered, my fight or flight instincts triggered. Was it the landlord's? No, it was a guy in his 20s, and I met and talked with the owner and his daughter on my way out. They were really nice people. So the house? Yeah, there was that odd, creepy smell of God knows what. As soon as I came in, my mind went, people died here. There was death here. Me, can you tell me where it was? One Google Maps search later, I confirmed that he went to the same place as me. It still weirds me out to this day.
Story 8. Mysterious Passenger.
I'm a truck driver, mainly doing all-road train work from Brisbane up around the top of Australia to Perth and along the Null Arbor. I've seen some strange things, but nothing like this. I don't usually venture into Victoria and New South Wales due to the roadside inspections and revenue-raising measures, but I had to do an express run to Melbourne via Sydney and then come back up the Newell Highway to collect a load for Toowoomba. My boss said, I don't mind if you pull up before you get around Coonabarabran, as some drivers choose not to go through there at night, with a chuckle. I said, it'll be fine, mate. Plenty of hours left. No worries, so I carried on. I was driving between Coonabarabran and Narrabri when out of nowhere, a woman flagged me down while hitchhiking. She said she needed a lift to her camp. I thought, what is going on here? But I said, hop in. And the moment she got in, the hair stood up all over my body, and I instantly felt like I should have kept going. She smelled like nothing I had ever experienced before, a stench that filled the cab. It was awful. She didn't say a word and just stared ahead. about 20 kilometers down the road, with no other vehicles passing. The woman said, "This is it," and I had to stop in a gully. She got out with a bag, didn't thank me or say anything. I looked around but saw nothing. No lights, no tracks, just complete emptiness. I was relieved when she was gone because I was feeling sick from the smell. I stopped at Narrabri for a few hours and decided to get going at daybreak. I had to sleep in the trailer because the smell was unbearable. When I woke up, another truck driver was doing his pre-start checks. I climbed out and he said, "Mate, they're really working you hard." I explained the terrible smell from the hitchhiker lady, and he went pale. He told me exactly where it happened, and I confirmed it. Then he said that woman was run over by a truck back in 1993. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought, is this guy serious? This happened in 2014, and to this day I've never been back to that part of New South Wales. The Pilliga Princess is real, that's for sure. I told my boss, and he just laughed, saying there are cold drinks in the fridge, so hurry up. He then showed me the camera footage from the truck, which showed the passenger door opening and closing on its own while I was looking across. But there was nothing on the footage of the woman, just thin air.
Story 9. Shadow that stalked me in the basement.
I always thought it was a bit close-minded to assume there were no such things as ghosts or supernatural occurrences. Just because I didn't have any personal experiences didn't mean they didn't exist. Science discovers new things every day. And then I did have an unexplainable experience. I was 10 years old and my dad, mom, younger brother, and I were visiting family in Virginia for Thanksgiving. It was a full house with cousins, aunts, uncles, and grandparents taking up every available space. So my family had to sleep downstairs in the semi-finished basement. My brother and I got cots and my parents had the pull-out sofa bed. The basement had 2 double doors that led out into the backyard. My uncle stated that they always kept the outside light on, but he would turn it off for us so we could sleep. So it's the middle of the night, and I'm laying on the cot, trying to sleep when I heard a whisper that sounded like someone saying my name. I was awake, but I kept my eyes closed because I didn't know what it was. It didn't sound like any of my family. It sounded gruff and growly. Then I heard footsteps start from directly next to my cot and proceed to pace around the room. I opened my eyes just a little and could see my brother sound asleep next to me. Anger started to overtake my fear as I thought maybe one of my cousins was pulling a prank, so I opened my eyes wide. The first thing I noticed was that the light was on outside, which was strange. But then I saw an enormous shadow standing outside the 2 glass doors, staring in. This thing had to have been at least 8 feet tall, and as I'm staring at this thing, it very slowly materialized through the glass doors without sliding them open, and was now within inches of my parents' heads. I couldn't see its face, but I instinctively knew it was staring directly at me. It raised its arms like it was going into attack mode, whether towards me or my parents, I couldn't tell. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. So I just threw the covers over my head and recited the Lord's Prayer over and over. I had never been so scared in all my life. I literally thought I was going to die. That this thing, whatever it was going to jump on me and harm me. And then, after all that, I somehow fell asleep. I have no idea how. I woke up the next morning and immediately told my dad what had happened. He just kind of laughed and said, "I was laying right there. Why didn't you wake me up?" That was a good question. And in retrospect, I feel really stupid for not trying to wake up my dad. I guess I was just so scared that I could hardly move. Anyway, I'm not saying what I saw was a ghost, but I saw something unexplainable, and it frightened me to my core.
Story 10. Something was watching.
This happened around 2009. I have a little brother who was born in 2008. Growing up, I would always have strange things happen to me. For example, I'd be in my room and I'd hear knocking at my door. I'd go to check, but no one was there. One time I even heard knocking coming from the mirror, but I brushed it off because I was young and didn't know much about paranormal things. When my brother was about 18 months old, my grandparents flew in to visit us, and that's when things got even stranger. One day my grandma was sleeping. She suddenly woke up screaming. When we rushed to the room she was in, she was hysterical, praying, screaming, and crying. We asked what was wrong, and all she could say was my brother's name over and over. So we all rushed to his room, afraid that something had happened to him. Thankfully, he was okay and sleeping peacefully. My grandfather comforted my grandmother, and we waited until she calmed down and fell back asleep. My mum, dad, and I went to the living room and sat down, unsure of what to say. About 20 minutes later, we heard a voice coming from my brother's baby monitor. It was a whisper. We looked at each other in shock, checked the camera, but there was nothing. We checked on my brother, and he was still sleeping. We went back to the living room, thinking we were just imagining things. Then, about 5 minutes later, we had settled down and turned on the TV. My dad had just fallen asleep when we heard a voice, a deep growl coming from the baby monitor. It was loud and very scary. My mother screamed, and at that exact moment, my brother's door slammed shut. My grandmother started screaming again. My dad ran to my brother's room, and my brother began crying. My dad couldn't get the door open, so eventually he had to break the door down. When he did, everything went quiet. My brother was just looking at my dad. My grandmother was whispering prayers, and my mum was still crying. At the age I was, I didn't know what had just happened. Later, we ended up going to my uncle's house, who at the time and still was a pastor. My brother and I were outside with my cousins, playing. We were supposed to be babysitting him, but we weren't the best at it. Shortly after, we couldn't find my brother, and we ran to our parents crying. They became frantic. As kids looked outside, and the parents searched inside. My uncle's house had 2 stories, a basement that had been converted into a living room, the ground floor, and the second floor. My cousin looked up at the second floor and saw my baby brother in the bathroom window, climbing out onto the roof, though it wasn't exactly a roof, more like tiling under the second floor windows as a cover from rain. We yelled, and I ran straight to the bathroom. My grandfather came with me, but we couldn't open the door. I stood back to let my grandfather try, and then I heard a female voice on the other side. It was very subtle, easy to miss, but I caught it. I bent down, peeked under the door, and saw what seemed to be a black figure at the window. My grandfather managed to open the door, but when he did, There was no one there. He quickly grabbed my brother and ran downstairs. Eventually, all of us kids had to go inside. We went to the living room with the adults and sat down. My uncle, the pastor, began to pray. We had a family prayer, and my uncle noticed my baby brother's behavior. After the prayer, my uncle began to pray over my brother. I watched my baby brother squirm. He was wailing, crying, and squirming as if my uncle's words were physically cutting through him. Eventually, after what seemed like years, my baby brother stopped moving. Everyone just stared at him. Then we heard him cry. Just a normal cry. My mom started crying, and my dad began thanking my uncle. It was never spoken about again, but it has always stayed with me. My brother is now turning 14 and has no recollection of what happened. To this day, I wonder what it was or whom it was exactly that wanted my brother and why it chose him.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight and remember, not all shadows are empty.